probably intentionally, but that's okay. We'll wait for a couple of others to or to connect their audio. Sherry, it's nice to see you. Are you in your office? Okay, it looks good. It looks good. You're muted, but I saw you mouthing that you're in your office. So, and Evan, I can't tell who that is lounging on your terrace, but it's probably somebody who is connected to you. So, can't tell. Um, Good evening. Hey, Samantha, nice to see you. Hi, Andrew, nice to see you. Welcome. Thank you for completing our minyan. That's exactly what you did when you came on screen. You didn't know that, but you made a minyan. Oh no, yeah. But once Evan left, we're back to 9. It's nice to see all of you. Um, we're gathering this evening in our own homes or outside our own homes. It seems some of us have pulled up a lawn chair. I remember the first time I observed Tisha B'Av in Israel. I spent the evening at the Kotel at the Western Wall, where it is typical, of course, to recite Kinot, which are dirges or lamentations, and to read from Echa, the scroll of Lamentations, from which we will also hear its words chanted tonight and do a little bit of exploring of that text and its meaning, both in its time and also as a source of reflection for our time. So right now we're just admitting members of our extended WRT family into our Tisha B'Av service online. We're grateful that you've joined us. Michelle, welcome. Nice to see you. Actually, a question, since I have the attention of some. I've already asked a few people in advance, including Sherry and David and Trish, and Jim Glucksman, who hopes to join us shortly, to help to join in our ritual by lighting a yahrzeit candle at a designated time. I'm just wondering, Samantha, you don't happen to have a yahrzeit candle on you, do you?
No, but we lit one last week for my grandfather, if that counts.
May his memory be a blessing. Ruthie, do you happen to have a yahrzeit candle? Nope. Are you out? Are you out east? Or
We
south?
are in Sea Island, Georgia.
I was wondering if you were going to your favorite haunt down there. That's nice.
Favorite haunt. It's not really out east, it's down south, but we're happy to be here.
How's the weather and how's the public health situation?
Humid and dire.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but we're same quarantine, different view.
Okay. Jim, nice to see you. And Sandy and George, nice to see you as well. Hey, Nicola, nice to see you. We're still admitting a bunch of folks. Oh, here comes Vicky Kravitz. So she's joining our Zoom. We'll take a moment after we open our service to introduce ourselves as well. But I'm just so happy to see all of you. And the fact that I'm seeing you indicates that you are all safe and well. So am I. Welcome to my living room. Please also allow me to introduce the other leaders of this evening's ritual. We're joined by Cantor Danielle Rodnitsky, who is the assistant cantor of Westchester Reform Temple, having begun on July 1st. So she's completing her first month at WRT, and this is her first official Jewish holiday, not counting Shabbat. And we're also joined by Bex Rosenblatt, who teaches Tanakh at the conservative yeshiva in Jerusalem, but who, like most people in academia, is conducting her learning and her teaching online tonight from Edgemont. So we're very happy that Bex joins and rejoins us. Bex has become a familiar face to many of us who study the Jewish tradition, starting already, a short while into her advanced degree in Bible study. She began to offer to guest spot for Torah study and other special events at the temple. So Bex, welcome. We're really happy that you're with us tonight. There's no formal Jewish greeting on Tisha B'Av. You don't say Chag Sameach because it's not a Chag. You don't say Good Yantiv because it's not a Yom Tov. You can say Erev Tov in the evening or Boker Tov in the morning, or you can wish somebody simply a blessing of comfort, or in the etiquette of Shiva, don't speak to somebody at all and wait for them to respond. So once again, very happy to have everyone joining us tonight. Does anyone who hasn't already been asked to contribute to our ritual tonight happen to have a yahrzeit candle? We're going to need one more. If not, I brought a spare, so we're good. Sherry's got one, David's got one, Jim's going to have one. All right, I've got the last one then, and you'll indulge me, and I will do something that comes with a little bit of risk, but I'll actually kindle fire in my living room. But we're really happy to see everyone. Tonight is the 9th of Av. As the sun sets, we enter the day of the year that is set aside for ritual commemoration of recursive tragedy on the Jewish calendar. Recursive because the destruction of the temple, which is the catastrophic incident most familiarly associated with Tisha B'Av, is not the only tragedy to befall the Jewish people and to be associated with this dark date on our calendar. According to rabbinic tradition, as we'll learn tonight, the original Tisha B'Av catastrophe was when spies came back from scouting out the land of milk and honey, only to report that yes, it flows with milk and honey, but it also is overpopulated with giants who will devour us, who will eat us alive. And the people were terrified, and they wept, and they turned the hearts of the Israelites against the planned conquest of the Promised Land. A catastrophe that led to their wandering in the wilderness. And ever since then, Jewish tradition has associated this one day on the calendar with all sorts of other tragedies that have befallen us, about which we will learn, and at each significant juncture in our service, we will kindle a candle. So that will be the flow of our ritual tonight. Will you please take one moment, without speaking, but to unmute yourself. Please be advised that you are being digitally broadcast on the Temple's Facebook Live page. So if you would prefer not to be seen or heard, that is entirely your prerogative. You can simply mute yourself or even dim your video camera and not show yourself. Otherwise, if you are willing to accept being seen on WRT's Facebook page and YouTube channel and on our streaming site, I would invite you at this time to say hello and introduce yourself by name.
Hello, Jim
Vicky
Clarkson.
Kravitz.
Hello, Jim. Hello, Vicky.
Hi, Sherry Weiner.
Hello, Sherry.
David Sokol and Trish Shalafa.
David and Trish, welcome.
Even Jay.
Hi, Eve. Hello, Jay. The Landows join us tonight. Welcome.
Nikki Rosendahl.
Hi, Nikki. Good to see you.
Alan Markowitz.
Sandy and George.
Hi, Sandy and George, and hello, Alan.
Hi, Steve and Fran.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Fran.
Hi, it's Ruth
Hello.
Sussman,
From Sea Island, Georgia. Welcome.
the Island, Georgia.
Very happy you're with us. Please also join me in wishing a very special WRT Shalom to Danielle Rodnitsky, our cantor, who joins us in leading the service with me and Bex tonight. So happy that Danielle is part of not just this ritual, but part of our WRT family. And so with that, I'm going to take the liberty of muting you, but of course you can unmute yourselves, and our service leaders will know how to do that when it's their time. And we're going to begin our Tisha B'Av observance. For Zion and her cities I mourn, like a mother in her anguish, like a young woman girded in sackcloth who mourns the husband of her youth. I mourn the exile of God's servants, makers of sweet melody. I mourn their blood, which has been spilled like Zion's streams. Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, a day of remembering the many destructions that have befallen us over the millennia. As the height of summer burns, we recall the countless fires that were set against our homes and our places of worship. Rabbinic legend tells us that on Tisha B'Av, the Israelites were punished to wander in the desert for 40 years. How many have been our years of wandering since then? How many empires have arisen intent on the Jewish people's fall? We do not celebrate this legacy. There are no prizes for victimization. Rather, we do what the Jewish people does so well in times of loss and remembrance. We mourn.
These words by the waters of Babylon come from Psalm 137, a psalm that is a communal lament expressing the yearning of the Jewish people during their exile in Babylon. Their tormentors, their captors, asked them to sing songs about Zion, about Jerusalem, and the response from our people was, how can we possibly sing our holiest songs in a strange land? By the waters of Babylon, we lay down and wept for thee, Zion. We remember thee, Zion. By the waters of Babylon, we lay down and wept for thee, Zion. We remember thee, Zion. We remember thee, Zion.
I'm wondering if I could ask somebody who joins us on our Zoom channel tonight to just unmute yourself if you'd be willing to read the next poem. I promise there's nothing in there that's going to trip you up. I'll just advance the slides until the end of this short reading. You're going to make me call on you, aren't you? Nikki, would you read for us, please?
Sure. Should I put the video on? 1 second.
You may.
Okay. After the fall, Rabbi, help me out with the pronunciation.
Oh, Rachel Barenblatt.
Rachel Barenblatt, easy enough. The Mishnah says, senseless hatred knocked the temple down, not the Romans with their siege engines. Or not only them, but our ancestors too, who slipped into petty backbiting, ignored Shabbat, forgot how to offer their hearts. We're no better, we who secretly know we're right, holier than they, we who roll our eyes and patronize, who check email even on the holiest of days, who forget that a prayer is more than a tune, more than words on a page. In Oslo, parents weep, and we're too busy arguing motive to comfort them. In the Middle East, parents weep, and we're too busy arguing borders to comfort them. Even now, what sanctuaries, what human hearts are damaged and burned when we snipe at each other or insist we're not responsible or look away.
Thank you. And so we light a candle in remembrance of the tragedy, the destruction of the temple. Not only the first temple when the Babylonians invaded in 586, but also the Second Temple in 70 CE. Sherry Weiner, would you feel able at this time to light your candle of memorial and put yourself on the video screen? There's no blessing, but just by saying hi, you'll show up. But you'll have to unmute yourself. Sherry, after you've lit the candle, I'll ask you to read this page on the screen. Thank you. Perfect. We see it. Thank you.
Okay. In the year 586 BCE, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to and destroyed the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. The prophet Jeremiah lived through this historic tragedy. The Book of Lamentations, which depicts scenes of desolation in Jerusalem after the catastrophe, is traditionally attributed to his hand.
Thank you, Sherry, so much. And so we arrive at the heart of the ritual for Tisha B'Av in the evening, which is to hear anew the words of Echa, the Book of Lamentations. So Cantor's going to offer the blessing before. You can say Amen each in your own place to affirm the blessing. And then we'll hear a little bit of the Ta'amei Mikra, the traditional cantillation for Echa. Now, there are 6 different modes, musical modes of chanting Jewish sacred text. And Echa has its own mode. The others include, of course, Torah, Haftarah. The high holidays Torah reading have their own mode, as well as the scrolls of the Song of Songs and Ruth and, I'm blanking on
Esther.
the third one. And Esther is different, but it's Song of Songs, Ruth, and Kohelet all have the same trope. Did I get all 6?
I think you did.
Okay.
I'm pretty impressed.
Thank you.
So here are our blessings before we recite the Megillah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher asanu asirei tikva. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al mikra Megillah.
Blessed are you, eternal God, sovereign of creation, who has made us captives of hope. Blessed are you, eternal God, who makes our lives holy with mitzvot, commanding us to read our sacred scrolls. And now in front of us we have an excerpt from the Book of Lamentations, the first chapter, the first 11 verses. We're going to read them. You'll notice that they form an alphabetical acrostic, meaning that each successive verse begins with the next letter of the alphabet, or in Hebrew, the Aleph Bet. So starting with Aleph, or A, Bet is B, and this translation of Echa even preserves the acrostic formula in English as it is rendered from the Hebrew. And we're going to just start by learning the melody that starts the book of Echa as a kind of refrain. You see in large letters at the top of the page, it says, Echa yashva vadad, alas, how lonely the city sits. So I'm going to sing that for you, and then you can try it on your own, and then you'll be hearing that melody throughout the chanting of Echa. Echa yashva vadad.
The other common phrase that you'll hear as we chant some verses from Echa is Yai dai 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 da dai, Yai dai 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 da dai. Let's try that together so you can practice hearing that as we chant. Yai dai 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 da dai, Yai dai 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 da dai. Okay, so now we are ready to hear the first 6 verses from chapter 1 of the book of the scroll of Lamentations. Echa ישבה ודד, העיר רבתי עם, הייתה כאלמנה. רבתי בגויים, שרתי במדינות, הייתה למס.
בכה תבכה בלילה, ודמעתה על לחיה, אין לך מנחם מכל אוהביה. קוראיה בגדו בך, היו לה לאויבים. גלתה יהודה מעוני ומרוב עבודה, היא ישבה בגויים, לא מצאה מנוח. כל רודפיה השיגוה בין המצרים.
דרכי ציון אבלות, מבלי באי מועד. כל שעריה שוממים, כהניה נאנחים. בתולותיה נוגות, והיא מרלה. היו צריה לראש, אויביה שלו, כי אדוני הוגה על רוב פשעיה. עולליה הלכו שבי לפני צר, ויצא מבת ציון כל הדרה. היו שריה כאיילים, לא מצאו מרעה, וילכו ולא כוח לפני רודף.
And now, taking one verse at a time, I'd like to call upon members of our congregation to share each one of you a verse. I'll even enlarge it so that it's not too taxing on your eyes. If you want to pass, just say pass. But Eve or Jay, could I ask that you would take verse 1? You just have to unmute before you speak. I tell you, though, as a rabbi, the ability to mute an entire congregation of Jewish people at will is truly extraordinary. I'm going to have a very hard time giving it up.
Okay, we
Eve,
found
you're
it.
on.
Okay. Alas, how lonely the city sits, one so full of people. She that was great among nations is become like a widow. The princess among states has become a thrall.
Bob?
Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheek wet with tears. There is none to comfort her of all her friends. All her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes.
Sherry, you did so well before.
Thanks. Captivity is Judah's fate because of misery and harsh oppression. When she settled among the nations, she found no rest. All her pursuers overtook her in the narrow places.
And could we invite Jim to read the 4th verse, please? Okay. So, Jim, can you unmute yourself and read verse 4? No, you just have to unmute yourself.
Anyway.
Oh, there we
now
go.
it does.
Thank you.
Darkness covers Zion's roads, empty of festival pilgrims. All her gates are deserted. Her priests sigh, her maidens are unhappy. She is utterly disconsolate.
Thank you. Alan, verse 5.
Enemies have become the masters now. Her foes are at ease because the Eternal has afflicted her for her many transgressions. Her infants have gone into captivity before the enemy.
Samantha, would you read verse 6?
From the daughter of Zion, all splendor has departed. Her leaders are like stags that find no pasture. They walk feebly before the pursuer.
Bex, would you read verse 7, please?
Great treasures from the days of old Jerusalem now recalls. She now remembers them in her days of woe and sorrow, now that her people have fallen by enemy hands, with none to help her, now that the enemies look on and gloat over her downfall.
Thank you. Steve or Fran, verse 8. Yep, just unmute yourself. You're good to go.
Verse 8,
Please.
how grievously Jerusalem has sinned. Therefore she has become a mockery. All who mired her despise her, for they have seen her disgraced, and she can only sigh and shrink back.
Thank you. Vicky, verse 9.
Into her skirts, her uncleanness has crept. She gave no thought to her future. She has sunk appallingly, with none to comfort her. See, O Eternal, my misery, how the enemy jeers.
Thank you. Sandy or George, would you read verse 10, please?
Shutting hands of the adversary are laid on everything dear to her. She has seen her sanctuary invaded by nations which you have denied admission into your community.
Thank you. And I'll take the last verse. Keeping themselves alive, all her inhabitants sigh as they search for bread. They have bartered their treasures for food. See, O Eternal, and behold how abject I have become. Echa yashva vadad. Alas, how lonely the city sits. And so now I'm wondering, Jim, if you could find that yahrzeit candle that you may just happen to have with you and kindle it as we move through Jewish time and Jewish memory and recall the expulsion from Spain and Portugal, which was a shattering moment in the history of our people. So Jim, you can just kind of wave that candle when you've got it. If not, it looks like your screen might be blank right now. Whoops. No, we're good. You're still muted, but that's okay. I can ask you to unmute. Great. We can hear you now. And I'm going to just go back a frame or two. Thank you. Here we go. It's okay. Once that candle is lit, we'll proceed with our service. Thank you.
So leave it 24 hours?
You can keep it burning for Tisha B'Av if you wish, yes. Our ancestors eventually returned from their exile in Babylon to rebuild their holy temple in Jerusalem. That second temple would be destroyed in the year 70 CE by the Romans. And that second destruction would set off 2 millennia of Jewish catastrophes: the crushing defeat of the Jewish Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans, the First Crusade, which decimated the Jewish communities of France and the Rhineland, the expulsion of the Jews from England in the year 1290. But few disasters would match the Alhambra decree of 1492, forcing the Jews of Spain and Portugal, who had there enjoyed a centuries-long golden age of literature, philosophy, science, and the arts, to flee their homes. There's this wonderful poem by the Spanish Jewish poet Yehuda Halevi, who actually composed not only in Hebrew when he was writing poems, but when he was writing his more academic kind of treatises, most famously a book called the Kuzari, which is really an interesting work of Jewish theology and philosophy. He wrote in Judeo-Arabic, which is the lingua franca of the educated classes of Jews of the Golden Age of Spain. Because Spain was for so many centuries under Muslim rule, Arabic was the official language of Spain, and many Jews learned and spoke Arabic, inflected with a little bit of their Jewish dialect as well, just like Yiddish is Judeo-German. He wrote, "My heart is in the east, and I am at the edge of the west." Whoops, I'm sorry. Every time I bump the screen, it advances a slide by accident. I'll just go back. Hello. "How can I possibly taste what I eat? How could it please me? How can I keep my promise or ever fulfill my vow when Zion is held by Edom and I am bound by Arabia's chains?" Edom is a stock name for the enemy empires of the Jewish people. "I'd gladly leave behind me all the pleasures of Spain, if only I might see the dust and ruins of your shrine." And so now we arrive at the third candle for the Shoah. And we know that there are so many, even now, even in our WRT community, whose story travels a direct line through the fires of Nazi Europe, including the family story of our congregant David Sokol. So David, you have a third candle. And if you would just announce yourself, and if you would read the slide as you complete lighting that third candle in acknowledgement of the Shoah, we would all be appreciative.
It's said that World War I began on Tisha B'Av, the August day in 1914 on which Germany declared war on Russia. But our greatest tragedy of modern times would begin 2 decades later.
Thank you, David. Words by Primo Levi, who himself was imprisoned in and survived Auschwitz. "You who live secure in your warm houses, who return at evening to find hot food and friendly faces, consider whether this is a man who labors in the mud, who knows no peace, who fights for a crust of bread, who dies at a yes or a no. Consider whether this is a woman, without hair or name, with no more strength to remember, eyes empty, and womb cold as a frog in winter. Consider that this has been. I commend these words to you. Engrave them on your hearts when you are in your house, when you walk on your way, when you go to bed, when you rise. Repeat them to your children, or may your house crumble, disease render you powerless, your offspring avert their faces from you."
This poem, Eli Eli, was written by Hungarian poet Kinah, who made Aliyah to the land of Israel when it was under the British mandate. And during World War II, the British recruited her to serve as a parachuter to try to rescue Jews in Eastern Europe. And unfortunately, on the border of Yugoslavia, she was captured and imprisoned and tortured. And all of this time, they're trying to get information from her about her mission, and she never divulged information, even upon threat of execution, which she was eventually executed. And so we remember her as a hero, and more importantly, as a poet. She has famous words that we recite all the time, like Yesh Kochavim, and like this poem, Eli, Eli. And actually, I just found out that next year is her 100th anniversary of the year of her birth. She would have been 100 years old.
ייגמר לעולם, החול
Elie Wiesel has written, "Never shall I forget that night, the first night in the camp, that turned my life into one long night, 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live as long as God himself. Never." So it gives me pleasure to welcome once again Bex Rosenblatt of the Conservative Yeshiva, and presently during the pandemic of Edgemont, New York, Bex is not only a distinguished Bible scholar and teacher, but also a very proud alumna of sharing Shabbat at Westchester Reform Temple, and claims that everything she knows about Judaism she learned in sharing Shabbat. But maybe in her advanced studies, she has continued to advance her love of Torah, and now we are the lucky ones because we get to have her share it with us tonight on Tisha B'Av. Bex, thank you.
Hi, thank you, Rabbi Blake, and thank you, Cantor Danielle. That was beautiful. It is always an honor to learn with you all. What's going to happen now is I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction, and then we're going to go through some of Lamentations together and make some sense of it. And the way we're going to make sense of it, the sense that we'll make of it, is different from the sense that I normally make of it. And the reason it's different is because, I don't know if you've noticed, but this year is not like other years. That we're living through a time that it hasn't happened before in my life. Some of you are much older than me and some of you are not, but this is, for all of us, a different time, a unique time. So before we make meaning ourselves, I'm going to tell you the sort of meaning I normally make when I read the book of Lamentations, the sort of meaning I've made in a normal year. The reason I think we read Eicha, I think we read Lamentations in any normal, 2017, 2014, pick a year, any year, it made sense then. So normally we read Lamentations and we discover that the structure of the book itself functions as an entry point for us as readers into feeling the pain and feeling loss and feeling a sense of catharsis for this pain and for this loss that is not our pain and is not our loss. That none of us were there 2,500 odd years ago. That none of us sat in the ruins of Jerusalem, that to sit on the ground or to sit here tonight and imagine that we are experiencing the ruins of Jerusalem is in some ways totally foreign. And when we look at the structure of Lamentations, what happens is we start with someone for whom that is also foreign. As you guys read tonight, when you read the first 11 verses of Lamentations 1, we start with this first speaker who seems like he's a fairly objective observer. He's in some way neutral. He's looking at the destroyed city and he's saying, all right, there she is. She suffered like this, she suffered like that. Let me write down, let me report to you the ways in which this city has suffered. And then as we go on through the next 2 chapters of Lamentations, this neutral observer gets into dialogue with Jerusalem herself. Jerusalem, who, as we read tonight in the very end of verse 11 of Lamentations 1, interjects, she interrupts the speaker and says, enough of you talking, see, look at me, behold how I have suffered. And what we see in the next 3 chapters of Lamentations is the speaker, this neutral observer, this person who is removed in some way from the suffering of Jerusalem. We see how he internalizes her grief, her suffering. In Lamentations 2, the 2nd chapter of the book of Lamentations, we get this wonderful line from the speaker: to what can I compare you? What can I make you like in order that I may comfort you? For your suffering is as vast as an ocean. That the speaker who had started out neutral gets to this point where he says, okay, enough. I need to comfort you. My role here isn't to observe. My role is to comfort. And the way I want to give comfort is by comparison, is by making you like something. But this suffering you've gone through is so foreign to me, and indeed foreign to the world, that I can't comfort you. I can't make you like anything. There's nothing in the entire world that could help you right now. And then she continues speaking, and he continues speaking, and they go back and forth. And we get to this point in Lamentations 3, where the speaker starts, Ani hagever ra'a oni, I am the man who has seen affliction. And he goes on in Lamentations 3 to describe the suffering of Jerusalem as if it's his own suffering, as if he's the one to whom this has happened, rather than Jerusalem. That he's no longer a neutral observer. He's no longer someone wishing for someone, like, if only I had someone to compare you to, oh Jerusalem. Rather, this is me. I have suffered like you have suffered, and I can be your comfort because I have internalized your grief. I have internalized your suffering to the point that I can imagine it happened to me myself. It's an incredibly powerful moment, and it's an invitation to us as a reader, as we're reading these 5 chapters of Lamentations, to say, okay, what am I doing imagining the destruction of Jerusalem 2,500 years ago? Well, I start out imagining it. I start out reading as we have these texts about destruction of Jerusalem, the texts about the expulsion from Spain, the texts even about the Shoah, which, horrible as they are, did not happen to us directly. And here on Tisha B'Av, the magic is that we, through reading and through the ritual of tonight, put ourselves into those shoes, become the people to whom those things have happened. So, in a nutshell, on one foot, that's what I'd say in a normal year. That's what my takeaway is from Lamentations on a normal year, is this structure, this incredible thing that allows us to imagine real suffering. That doesn't quite work for this year. That the takeaway from Lamentations this year isn't let's be more empathetic, isn't let's imagine ourselves as sufferers. Let's put ourselves into this for one night. Let's imagine what it might be to suffer. That for this year, we all comparatively are still incredibly lucky people living wonderful lives. But for this year, there's been suffering in our lives in a way that's more real and more comparable, and allows us to approach this text not as foreign observers learning to internalize loss, but rather as fellow mourners meeting a friend in her own mourning. So what I'm going to ask of you guys tonight is, we've got a bit of time, and I brought for you the first, Lamentations is a book of 5 chapters. I brought the first verse of each of those 5 chapters, and we're going to read together those 5 verses and think about them as responses to loss. Think about, they're 5 totally different ways of responding to loss, 5 completely different frameworks, 5 totally different methods of understanding what's happened now and what what the speaker, what we feel called to do in response. So we're going to read them. Those of you who've learned with me before, which is almost all of you, which is incredible. And for those of you who don't, hi, I'm terribly honored to meet you. But anyway, for those of you, for all of you, you know that I just talked more than I usually ever talk in something I'm teaching. And that from this point onwards, I'm going to be asking a couple questions, but we're going to be making meaning as a group of us. So in the, oh, no, I'm not done talking. I've got one more thing to say. I'm sorry. Just last bit of background on Lamentations, where we are right now in this book, what's happened. It's 586 BC, or it's some point between 586 BC and let's say 500 BC, a little bit later. And we've seen our nation dissolve. We've seen ourselves become progressively weaker. We've seen foreign nations encroach on our freedoms. We've seen the religious structure dissolve and crumble until we don't know what to believe in or who to trust. And we've seen then, with all of these things happening, as if that weren't enough, Diana, we've seen the Babylonians come in and they laid siege to our city for an entire year. And we starved, and we sat in the streets and we starved. And we lost our fathers, and we lost our husbands, and we lost our sons. And we were the only ones left as we were starving, and we were considering, and then we did eat our children as we starved to death in the streets of our city. And then as if the starvation wasn't enough, the Babylonians came and they destroyed our temple, and they destroyed our city. And when they destroyed our temple, we didn't know if that meant God was dead. God lives in the temple. God's always lived in the temples. I mean, he wandered around in the Mishkan, how do we call this in English? In the traveling ark thing in English.
Oh, the tabernacle?
The tabernacle, there we go, thank you.
It's where the Mormons put their choir.
In the Mormon choir place, in the tabernacle, but he's always been located in the place, and now we've destroyed God's home, and we're confronted with this problem of, is God dead, just like our husbands are dead, just like our fathers are dead, just like our sons are dead, and is our nation dead? And it's just this complete devastation, complete theological destruction, complete destruction of any idea of group identity. And from that place, we're lamenting. From that place, we are crying out, complaining against the God, saying, listen, look, see me, God, see me, world, because something is not right. So, long introduction. Now I'm going to ask you guys to click on the link that I shared in the chat. So Bob, it looks like—
So to find that, you just go to your chat icon. It looks like a little word bubble down at the bottom of your Zoom window, unless you're on a tablet, in which case you're on your own to find it. But when you click in chat, Bex has already provided a link, and when you click the link, it will open up a separate document that you can now look at on your personal device and follow the opening verses of the different chapters of Eicha.
Okay. All right, I'll give you guys a second. Oh, yeah, no, we're all there. We got this. That was a beautiful explanation. Thank you, Rabbi Blake.
Nobody here is a Zoom newbie at this point.
We've all been through this.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so what I'm going to ask us to do is we're going to read the first verse of each chapter one at a time. And we're going to make sense of them as individual verses, and then we're going to be thinking about, okay, what is this person saying? What is their framework? What's driving them to speak? What's driving them to open their mouth and complain? Driving them to open their mouth and wail against God here. I know almost all of you, so be warned, I'm going to call on you if you guys don't talk, but I'm sure you guys will talk. Can I get a volunteer to read us Lamentations 1:1?
I thought Fran's hand went.
Wait 1 second, I lost it now. Here it is. Alas, how can the city sit alone? Once great with people, she has become like a widow. Once great among nations, princes among provinces, she has become a slave.
Okay, thank you, Fran.
Sure.
So what's going on? What's this opening verse? What's driving this person to speak? What's their concern? What do they care about? Why open their mouths here?
In comparing in a city to a widow or a princess, first of all, we feminize this city, which is an interesting way of looking at it. We start with woe is me, alas. That's the very first word we see. They don't say, rats. They say alas. It's like an admission of defeat. And the other thing is that if the city is the widow, are we not the deceased spouse of that widow? Or are we not the king whose daughter has been taken from her in so many words? It's just a lot of strange sexual role-playing imagery.
Great, thank you, Bob. I can always trust you to bring that reading in. But yes, that there's something really interesting going on. If the city is like a widow, and we're personifying Jerusalem, Jerusalem is personified as a woman here who's lost her husband somehow. It mirrors this metaphor we play with in prophets, where Jerusalem is personified as God's spouse, right? For those of you who are familiar with the book of Hosea, it starts off the book of Hosea in a grand way. It also shows up in a number of the other prophetic books. But this idea that God and Jerusalem are in this relationship, and Jerusalem's always cheating, or in the language of the Bible, whoring after other gods rather than staying committed and faithful to God. That, of course, does something interesting, Bob, as you're pointing out. What does it mean that Jerusalem's like a widow then? What is this speaker's concern? If Jerusalem's like a widow, who's dead? Or who is like dead?
Well, her husband is dead, and her husband would theoretically be the Jewish people who once were the rulers or the dominant party in this city.
Great. Okay, so one possibility, the Jewish people are as her husband, the Jewish people are as if dead. Great. Other possibilities for who is Jerusalem's spouse, who is like dead here?
Well, I look at it as reminiscent of the photographs of Times Square in New York, bubbling with people, and now it is completely alone, like a widow, alone. Great city, a great nation has become a slave. The parallel is not a big stretch.
Great, yeah, that sitting alone imagery is something all of us like. Yes. Here we are sitting alone, just as Jerusalem is sitting alone. Wow, thank you, Alan. Yeah. Other thoughts on this?
Yeah, another thought. There's no mention of God in this first stanza at all. It's God is not just abandoned the city. It's not even part of anything. Jerusalem is a nation like every other.
Great. Okay, so God is not showing up here. Great. Thank you, Mark.
Fran had her hand up.
Thanks, Fran. All yours.
I was just going to ask a question, and maybe the answer is now no, based on what your dad said. I was going to ask you if it's possible that they're questioning if God is dead.
Yes.
Is God the spouse?
Yes, 100%. Thank you, Fran. So that God doesn't show up explicitly in this verse, but this verse, as we've been pointing out, this verse with which we're opening Lamentations, this first way of responding to the destruction is to say, as Alan said, okay, we're describing emptiness. we're describing there not being people, we're describing the feeling of being alone. And then as Fran, as you're saying, this loneliness, this emptiness comes from the fact that perhaps God is missing. That if Jerusalem is like a widow, God is perhaps like dead. Bob, as you just said in the chat, maybe God's not quite dead, but he's homeless. We've been separated from God. And that seems to be the driving concern here in Lamentations 1:1, right? This how could a city be alone, and where is God?
Also, being a widow is a great loss of status in that society. You lose everything.
Great. Yeah, you lose everything. And what how many times in the Torah itself are we told to care for the widow? And here, of course, we can't care for the widow because our society has been destroyed. Right. So she's being left as a widow with no one to care for her, which is a line, I don't think we saw it in Lamentations 1:1-11, but that comes up again and again in Lamentations 1 and 2. There is no one to comfort her. There is no one to comfort her. There's no one to comfort her. Yes, yes, Steve.
Yeah, one of the more famous widows in the Torah is Tamar, and Tamar becomes a widow, I guess, twice, and then through machinations, she is able to continue the line with Judah, and if she hadn't resorted to machinations, the line would have died out.
Great, yeah, and I think great, Steve. I think you're definitely picking up on something there that we've got this idea of widowed Jerusalem, and just like in the story of Tamar, there's a question of where's the progeny? What's happened to the children? From where are children coming once the husband is gone? All right, we're going to move on. And those of you who've learned with me before know that we are always going to have to rush our way through texts. We could wish we spent half an hour on each, but we don't have the time. So Lamentations 2 verse 1, the second box. Can I get someone to read that? Actually, no, I'm going to read it. You all have thoughts on it, but I'm going to read it. All right. Alas, how can the Lord cover daughter Tzion in a cloud of anger from his nose? He sent from the heavens to earth the splendor of Israel, and he did not remember his footstool on the day of the anger of his nose. All right. What's going on here? What's the driving concern? Why did this speaker open their mouths? What's causing this speaker to speak? Very different from Lamentations, from the box we just read, right? From the opening of Lamentations 1. Lamentations 1 started similarly with Echa, with this how can this be possible? Here in Lamentations 2, though, we're asking different questions.
Why has God forsaken us?
Why has God forsaken us? All right. Other thoughts?
Or has he been not only forsaken us, has he destroyed us?
Great. Yeah. So if Lamentations 1 was more forsaken, perhaps, and Lamentations 2 it's not that God's forsaken us, it's that God is killing us. It's that God is punishing us. It's that God is perhaps even acting as our enemy. Yefeh.
Just as a sidebar, since the God's nose pops up twice in this passage, God, like Rudolph, is the only character in Jewish tradition who appears to have a nose that glows. It is a familiar euphemism throughout the Hebrew scripture that when God gets really, really angry, his nose glows red. That's one biblical idiom for describing intense fury.
Great, thank you.
It's almost like the nostrils of a bull also.
Exactly, they flare.
The anger, yeah. It's not just about the destruction, it's sort of blaming God or saying, how could you, after providing us with so many blessings, establishing us in this holy land, how could you then forget all of that and destroy us? Even in your anger, how could you go this far?
Great. Wow, thank you. So it's almost like we're trying to hold God accountable, perhaps? All right. Other thoughts here? Holding God accountable, God, angry God, sinners in the hands of an angry God.
Well, I would say, are we not looking in the mirror here ourselves? Because maybe we made God angry with us, and it seems like the narrator doesn't look in the mirror.
Great. Okay, so when we're thinking about this as like a response to destruction, this is a response where we're looking at the authority and saying, how could you do this to us? I'm going to hold you accountable for having done this to us. I'm not going to say, and perhaps maybe there was things I could have done better myself. Great. All right, Fran, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question. I know there's the footstool, God's footstool means something, but I can't remember what.
Thank you for asking.
Metaphor for something, but I absolutely cannot remember what it is.
It usually refers to the temple. The temple is God's earthly footstool.
Okay.
Great. All right, we're going to keep moving. I told you guys we were going to run through this, and we're running. So Lamentations 3, I'm going to read again. And as always, the question is, what's moving this person to speak? What is their response to destruction? I am the man who has seen affliction under the rod of his overflowing anger. Me he has driven and made walk in darkness and not light. Yes, against me he returns and turns over his hand all the day. So on the surface, it seems fairly similar to what we'd said about Lamentations 2, right? Is there more? Is there something different? Is what's driving this guy to speak?
It's more personal.
It's an individualization, a self-identification.
Okay, so it's not just that God's done this, God has now done this to me. It's
not just my city that I'm sad about.
It's not just my city. It's not, in fact, it's not my city at all. It's just,
Yeah,
it's me.
right. Yeah, it's like I can picture, like, this is the moment where Stallone in the movie says something like, now it's personal.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I'm suffering. Like, God, why are you making me suffer? Surely we could do this better. Okay.
It's identification or self-identification with Jerusalem, as if he is now Jerusalem, and this is how Jerusalem is actually feeling.
Okay.
But it's God making it happen. Because it's referring to another, who is the he that he's referring to? Feels like God.
Great. So at this point, and really good differentiation, we're not even mentioning God's name. We're not even saying Adonai as we had before, spelled out, not Yud He Vav He, but Aleph Dalet Vav Nun Yud. That at this point, we're saying it's all about me, right? It's God has done this to me, and I'm not even going to mention God's name. I'm not even going to bring God directly into the picture. Anonymous third person he has done this to me, and I'm focused on myself, and I'm looking at my own suffering, perhaps on the same level of Jerusalem, but it's me who has suffered, and this is my own individual cry out against the wrongs that have been done to me. Great. All right, and Lamentations 4, this is going to sound very different. And you'll note that it's still got that echa, that how, alas, how, but what we're going to say is going to sound very different. Alas, how can the gold be dulled? How can the good, pure gold change? The sacred stones poured out on the corner of every street, the precious children of Tzion, worth their weight in fine gold. Alas, how can they be thought of as shards of clay jars, the work of a potter's hands? So these two verses are a little bit complicated. What is it that we're saying here?
It's like a devaluation of the currency, basically. This gold that was worth $1,000 an ounce is now worth sand. Basically, it's worth garnished. And so we were once the chosen people, and now we're just like the hoi polloi.
Great. That Bob, as always, you win for most languages squeezed into one comment. All right, so this is complete devaluation of something, of currency, of the gold. We're also seeming to compare the gold to the children, right? It's the children who've been devalued, right? Here we have the precious children of Zion, worth their weight in fine gold. How can they be thought of as shards of clay jars? So if in a normal catastrophe, we have devaluation of currency, here we have devaluation of children. Here we have the next generation thought of as shards of a clay pot in a potter's hands. What does that mean?
So that imagery of the clay in the potter's hands is really interesting to me because during the High Holy Days, there's a liturgical text called Kinah Kachomer, where we actually are clay in a potter's hands, God as potter. And so it's interesting that here it's a really negative devaluation of who we are. And on the High Holy Days, there's a sort of recognition of, yes, we are like clay.
Great. And both of those, there's this, who's the potter? The potter is God, presumably, right? God's the one who formed us from dust. God is the one who shapes us. In the prophetic books, we have that metaphor of God shaping us from clay as the potter a lot. As you just brought up in the High Holy Days, it's God shaping us for good, right? God doing good. Here, it's God holding us and being like, you're made of dust and I can crush you. There's nothing holding you together besides the breath I breathed into you. And when I decide that's no longer the case, I can crush you and you are gone. It's a terrifying, terrifying image. And indeed, in Lamentations 4, what we're having here, our response to destruction, it's not about me, as it was in Lamentations 3, and it's not even necessarily blaming God, blaming the guy in charge. Here in Lamentations 4, we seem to say, this is too much. This is, you are killing children. Children are dying. And God is able to kill children, and that is too much for me to process. That is too much for me to deal with. I don't know how to make sense of that. How is it even possible that there could be a God who would kill children? Similar to that Elie Wiesel thing we read when he first entered the concentration camp. How is it possible that children are going to their deaths? And it's this response to destruction of just total disbelief, total, how could this be?
Especially when all you've ever been taught and told and believed is that you have a special covenant with this God. So.
Maybe next time he can choose someone else.
Exactly, Tevye, exactly.
Great, okay. And the last possibility, last book of Lamentations, chapter of Lamentations, Lamentations 5. We get, and it's going to sound a lot different. All the other chapters started with Echa, or at least with the letter Aleph. Here we're not going to get that. Here we get, remember Hashem, what happened to us. Behold and see our disgrace. So this last call to action, last call, this last reason we open our mouths, this last way of responding to destruction, what's happening here? Oh, someone's talking, but very softly. Jay, was that you?
It was Eve.
Oh, Eve, go on.
I forgot already what I said. Well, I was thinking of what Bob said earlier with regard to our taking some responsibility, that we had some role in all of this. So the last line in this, behold and see our reproach disgrace.
Great. So it's about, rather than about me, it's about us, and it's about our perhaps wrongdoing. It's the first thing that sounds even close to some sort of admission of responsibility for us. Yafeh. Other thoughts? Sherry, were you about to say something? No? Great. Yeah, so it's also it's the first time, the only time that we start out one of these chapters addressing God. And we're saying, God, look at us. God, see us. God, remember us. And it seems to be this final way of addressing catastrophe, right? We've had 4 different responses to destruction so far. And here, the 5th response to destruction is to say, okay, maybe we've done wrong, and God, maybe you've done wrong, but we can remember that there's a better way. And we, in partnership with the powers that be, or the power that be, can figure out how to get back to a way that's good. Remember ourselves to good, remember ourselves to a future. All right.
Which we say on the high holidays. Zochreinu Adonai Eloheinu bo letovah.
Okay, thank you. And that's also on the high holidays, we say the same way we end in Lamentations 5, the second to last verse that we repeat, which I don't have in front of me, but
doesn't matter because we're going to be davening it together in just about a minute.
So you'll see it in a minute. Those are 5 ways of responding to destruction. Those are 5 ways that on different days resonate with me in different ways. And I want to leave you guys with that. So thank y'all.
Thank you so much. And Bex, Yasher Koach, each one of us has internalized the dynamics of destruction over the last 4 months in ways that go beyond the abstract way in which we might parse a catastrophe that is farther away or that affects people who we know were good people, but we didn't know their names. At least for those of us who are part of our Westchester community, I don't know anyone who is untouched by the pandemic. I don't know anyone for whom the destruction about us is merely an abstraction. As I said before, now it's personal. And so we can lament the toll on our nation and on our world, but I also think that Tisha B'Av is an invitation to find our own personal connection, our own place of mourning, and acknowledge what we have lost. So thank you for allowing us, Bex, to do that through the beauty and depth of our textual tradition and through Eicha, this most foreboding text. We're enriched by your presence and your learning. And so, as we begin to move toward the conclusion of tonight's liturgy for Tisha B'Av, which is the end of a service, but really only the beginning of a full day of mourning, lamentation, deep contemplation, and if you are following the traditions of abstention, a day in which certain pleasures and nourishment are deprived to us because we need fully to feel the weight of what we as a people have endured then and this strange and strangest of all Tisha B'Av summers and now. And so we would not end, however, in the Jewish tradition on such a forbidding or foreboding note. That's not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is to seek out and provide a nechemta, an Aramaic word that literally means comfort, a message that consoles, that provides some solace, that allows us to raise our downcast eyes and once again feel imbued with hope. As we said at the beginning in our bracha before we listened to Eicha, we are what the prophet called asirei tikva. We are captives of hope. We are, as a Jewish people, it is our destiny, it is our fate. It is a kind of liberating prison that we cannot escape the fact that we are called to feel hope and even more to bring hope and bring light into darkest corners. And so I'll take upon myself the special privilege of lighting this last Yahrzeit candle, which I noticed, by the way, is inscribed with a Hebrew phrase. Mine says Nishmat Adam, which literally means the soul of humankind, and comes from a verse from the scripture that the candle of God is the human soul. And so as we light this candle of hope, Cantor will be leading us in a couple of melodies that inspire a feeling of hope in the heart.
We return, we return, we return, return again. We return, we return, we return, return again and again to hope, to we return again to hope. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Chadesh Yameinu kekedem. We return, we return, we return, return again. We return, we return, we return, return again and again to you, to we return again to you.
So with those words, which are the refrain that Bex referenced at the end of her presentation this evening, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha, return us unto you, O God, V'nashuva, and we shall return, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Let our days be renewed as they were in the past. So too do we now prepare to memorialize our dead through words that have linked the generations each to each, and in our saying them, they are renewed, and a little part of our soul is revived. So at this time, if any of you would like to share a name of a loved one for whom we are observing a yahrzeit on this Tisha B'Av, or who has been taken from your midst of love, family, or friendship in recent days, you can share those names out loud or hold those names quietly within your hearts.
S. Byron, Laura Fitterer, and Harold Levine.
Thank you.
Mitchell Goldberg.
We also name Hyman Sugar. Together with all those of our people who met their end in acts of violence and persecution against them because they were Jews. On this Tisha B'Av, we remember. If you are so moved and able and would like to stand for the mourner's Kaddish, you may do so at this time. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agalau vizman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shemei rabba mevarach le'alam alamei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudesha barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechemata. Da'amiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlam araba min shemaya. B'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. V'imru amen. Osei shalom b'imromav hu ya'asei shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. V'imru amen. V'imru, v'imru amen. V'imru amen. We're going to conclude our service with a prayer for the kind of world that, with divine inspiration and sacred partnership from one person to another and from all of God's children across the world, maybe we can bring this day about. Please join us. Let nation not lift up sword against nation. Let them study war no more. And let each of us, each in our own way, in our families, in our homes, in our communities, in our world, seek peace and pursue it. I'm so grateful that each of you has chosen to spend a little time with us this evening, be part of your WRT family, to experience the mournfulness, but also the hope embedded within this interesting and challenging day on the Jewish calendar. Once again, I express my appreciation to you, Bex Stern Rosenblatt, not just for your scholarship, but for the deeply personal way in which you always bring your full self to our learning of Torah, by which I mean accumulated Jewish wisdom. Thank you so much. And very nice for all of you to have a chance, maybe it's your very first time praying with Cantor Danielle Rodnitsky. Cantor Rodnitsky is of course going to be become a very familiar face over the coming weeks, particularly on the High Holy Days, but why wait 7 weeks to get to know her? So if you haven't yet been introduced to Cantor Rodnitsky, just reach out to the temple office and make a time to say hi. It's a little bit tricky for a new clergy person to come into a job and still have to maintain a physical distance while wanting to connect deeply with the many households in our congregation. So we're all going to do our best to help Cantor Rodnitsky feel like she's already a deeply embraced part of the WRT family, which of course she is. So you can unmute yourselves and wish one another a message of comfort and strength and solace as we march from this evening worship into the rest of our day of mourning. Thank you.
Better times ahead.
Thank you.
Stay healthy and well.
May you as well. And if you wish to keep your lights of memorial burning for the day of Tisha B'Av, you of course may.
What is the holiday?
Bye.
Hi, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Bob, what was your question?
What is the proper greeting for this holiday?
There is none.
Okay.
I tend to say something like, Hamakom Yenachem Etchem B'toch Sha'ara Ve'lei Tzion V'Yerushalayim, which is the traditional morning greeting, which says, may God May God's comfort be with you and all of the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. So I say that, but simply like at a house of Shiva, you kind of wait for the other person to acknowledge you.
Okay.
All right, everyone, stay safe, stay well. Please stay hydrated even if you're fasting.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.